Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's Toast to the Arts and Parks show. We do this every first Friday in partnership with the National Parks Arts Foundation. And we love the National Parks Arts Foundation. We call them NPAF. They put together these amazing artist residencies in parks across the country. Places like Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, Dry Tortugas, where you can stay on your own island, like really your own island for a month.
I want my own island.
There's places like Gettysburg, there's places like Chaco Canyon, Aztec ruins, and then there's also Fort Union up in northern New Mexico, Fort Union National Monument, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We have photographer Jim Schlett back on the show. Jim has traveled all over the country doing national park artist residencies and other parks, not always a national park. And he's done a few with the National Parks Arts Foundation. And the first time he came on the show was about his Gettysburg experience, and then telling us also about becoming a residency, like how to become a resident, not a residency, but becoming an artist in residence. And then he also was back on our reunion show last year, and he's back today to talk about his recent adventures in Fort Union, what we all call Fort Windy. So welcome back, Jim. How are you?
I am great. Thank you very much for having me again. And you are correct. Fort Union is also known as Fort Windy, much to our shock that it was that strong and that ongoing of literally every day we had there. The Rangers were telling us this is probably the windiest year we've had in 5 or 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We were there 2 years ago, I think, Nancy. We met Lorenzo. Lorenzo's been on our show. He's a superintendent. He's been, on our show over the years, and we finally got to meet him, which was awesome. But like, we got out of the car and it's like, you can, if the door is either going to open for you or close on you because of the wind.
Yeah, yes. For
Amazing.
sure. My wife had that problem a couple times when the door just really whipped open.
Yeah.
Wow. What was it like for you? And I want everyone to know your website too. It's photomanva.zenfolio.com. And Jim is also on Facebook, Instagram. Follow him there because he posts so many amazing photos every day. I get excited. I'm like, there he is. He's at it again. And I know you've done some adventures in New Mexico before, but when we first connected with you, we were talking about Gettysburg, and I know you've been to a lot of the battlefields in the East. And Nancy and I, since we first talked to you, now experienced a lot of those battlefields and places like Harper's Ferry, which I know you've been to as well, and photographed. In fact, I know I went places, I'm like, Jim was here. We're standing in his footsteps. But there's a difference to me in the battlefields and places, military, national monuments like Fort Union, and the battlefields in the East. Don't you feel like it's like even some of the same wars were fought, but in a different way?
Yes.
But it's different, isn't it?
It's very different. East side of the country versus west side with the historical battle sites. In fact, the more we talked to the Rangers about that fort, it was obvious there was just relatively speaking, minor fighting in the Civil War there. But what surprised me was how tied in that fort was with being a supply center to, I think Lorenzo told me, 46 other military installations in the Southwest. And it was a huge stopover point for the Santa Fe Trail. And I had gotten very interested in the Santa Fe Trail back in 2021 when I was in Capulon, Volcano Park, which is on the north, about 2 hours north of Fort Union. And part of the Santa Fe Trail ran through that area too. So to see this fort that became a huge supply center for the Santa Fe Trail people was just pretty amazing, especially when you walk around there early morning and late evening when the sun is setting that, I know it sounds crazy, but you can almost envision those huge wagon trains rolling through there to get supplies, and what activity must have been going on in the fort at that time.
And they have those trails and they mark them, like, this is where it
Right.
went through, and it was, is it, because there was like there were different, the fort was rebuilt like 2 or 3 times, because there's like different stages when you tour the fort itself, there's different stages, but I don't care what stage you were in of it, of what, whatever year the new fort was rebuilt or built, it didn't look comfortable to me. I don't think
No.
I wanted,
It's
you,
it's pretty basic.
yeah, you didn't want to go to hospital and you did not want to go to jail
No.
when you're
No.
there.
Oh no.
Yes, for sure. But I will tell you this, when we did one of the private tours with Ranger Mike, he was telling us at some point that hospital was the largest hospital for 500 miles.
Wow.
On the Santa Fe. And not only did they take the military people, they would take civilians too. And he said there was a span of 15 or 16 years that out of like 3,000 or 4,000 patients, only 7 or 8 died, which is pretty remarkable time period and medicine compared to what we know today, that it was considered like sort of state of the art.
Wow. I mean, that's a really low figure for patient deaths, especially back then.
Yes, it really was. And when you look at it now, which is basically those ruins, and see the pictures of what it actually looked like back in the 1860s and 70s, it's hard to believe those ruins that are left today were that really nice looking set of buildings that, a lot of pioneers couldn't wait to get to when they stopped there on the Santa Fe Trail for whatever ailed them.
And
So it was very
because,
fascinating to see that aspect.
yeah, because the Southwest is not exactly the most hospitable part of the country in regards to the terrain, and the northern New Mexico area, I mean, it's beautiful, and you have, what I like is, it isn't what you expect, right, of northern New Mexico. And because it's a little different, you've got prairie land there, which is something people don't expect, and antelope, and yet at the same time you do have cactus, and you do, it's kind of an interesting area where everything kind of connected, and I think the fort was there because there is a water source. We didn't get to the water source, but I don't think there's water in it now, but, or is there?
There actually is, just outside the fort on some of the ranches. That's where the water supply basically was, and still is today, because we actually had a number of geese coming in and out of that area while we were there.
Cool.
So, and that was one of the reasons, like you said, they did pick that, because it was fairly close to a water source there. And, it was in a great value to all of those pioneers and the rest of the Union forts in the Southwest because of that location. And the only reason eventually it winds up closing down is because as the railroad expands closer and closer to the city of Santa Fe itself, there's no longer any need for wagon trains anymore. So, and once that happened, within a few years, they wind up shutting down and abandoning the fort.
Right.
That's a shame. You would think somebody would like make a hotel or something.
Right.
Well, eventually down the road, I think things like that started to happen. But, when you talk about the Santa Fe Trail, Nancy and I have been on different portions of it, like in Santa Fe itself, down at the plaza. And then there's other park sites throughout Santa Fe on the Santa Fe Trail. And then we've done it Kansas. We've been on the Santa Fe Trail in Kansas, and some of the ruts. I mean, again, it's like this open land, and you're going like, these people were just out in the middle of nowhere. I mean,
absolutely.
I've driven Kansas. You are out in the middle of nowhere,
But
but they have the
just
best sunrises and sunsets. They really do have amazing sunrises and sunsets.
It's so flat compared to other parts of the country.
Yes, it certainly is flat. And what's very interesting we found and we drove down from Denver to get there, is when you're on those plains, Fort Union is at 6,700 feet above sea level, and it's perfectly
Oh.
level there, which it's hard to comprehend you're that high above sea level.
Yeah.
And that was an issue with a lot of pioneers too, of going from the east to the west of the altitude changes, that a lot of them weren't even aware when you're in the plains you're that high above, what they had come from on the east side of the country.
Oh,
But
yeah,
there's
and
a lot
the
of the
humidity,
ranges-
and
yeah,
no
one of the
humidity.
ranges tell us- Yes, no humidity whatsoever. That was a comment by some of the rangers who have relocated from the East Coast about what a difference that issue is. No humidity and a really limited amount of rain in that area.
Mm. However, you got your photos of the snow. I mean, I was loving your time there. And we were in snow while you were there, and we were in a lot more snow. So I felt like, okay, I know you were cold and that was not what you expected, right? To actually get snow at the fort, but it has those colors, like if you're in Sequoia National Park, that red, cinnamon red bark of a sequoia tree, and then you get snow is just like,
Yes.
yes, it's delicious,
Yeah,
right? And
Beautiful.
then you had that same thing, that same coloring at the fort, blue sky.
Yes.
Here's the fort, this adobe red clay fort
Mhm.
and snow. It's magic, man. You had awesome photos
Yes.
from there.
And that's the way we felt. Tanya had actually warned me about how cold it could be, but she had not mentioned the possibility of snow. And we did have two snowstorms that only lasted for about an hour. They dropped about 2 inches of snow on the ground each time. And as soon as it started snowing, we left the apartment and we got back up into the fort, and it was cold. And the second storm was extremely windy coming down at the same time. And it was about, I want to say, 18 degrees. So we
Wow.
lasted about an hour out there taking pictures.
I bet.
Wow.
But you're
But
right
at least-
about the colors too.
Mm.
Yeah, your photos are beautiful, just, oh, we love following your photos, period, and your adventures, your park adventures. But I mean, to me, it's just New Mexico, and I know like you've done other parks in New Mexico, but like the colors change. I mean, you could go down the road an hour and the colors are different again, except for the blue
Yes,
sky states.
absolutely. That is one of the
Mhm.
things that is very, very attractive to me about New Mexico, is that the colors, like you say, of not only the landscapes, but the adobe buildings. And if you get the right blue skies with the really brilliant Ansel Adams clouds, I mean, I could spend, months out there doing that stuff.
Yeah. For
Oh.
sure, because it's just so amazingly different every time you look at it. I mean, even as the sun goes down, if you watch the same place for a whole day, which, I mean, who
Yeah.
has time to do that? But if you watch the same place a whole day, it's amazing how much it changes.
Mm.
Right. And I think some of the rangers were surprised how many times we walked that fort early morning. And because most mornings I was up at, 45 minutes before sunrise. I'd get up there to the fort itself, 30 minutes before sunrise, walk the entire fort, stick around for an hour. We do some other stuff during the day, and we repeat the same things that evening, of doing the same walk around with the sunset to see the different effects of the light and the colors and the sky. And every night was and every morning and day was slightly different. And I can't say I regretted saying, boy, I wish I would have slept a couple extra hours that morning instead of taking pictures.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I think this is the beauty of these artist residencies that MPAF does, because it's a full month. And so much can change depending on especially like on seasonally, right? And so you got to have weather. Some people get to have lava in Hawaii Volcanoes Park. It could happen, right? So you get to have all these different experiences, but be able to truly immerse yourself, where others, it's like, you have a week, you better do everything you possibly can. And I think sometimes when you become rushed, like photography takes time. It's, even if it's digital, you don't just go click, 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 click. There's more to it.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
one of the great things about it, like you said, is the 4 weeks rather than 2, because not only do you have 30 days from beginning to end of the lighting changes, the sunrise time changes.
Mm.
We started to see all sort of signs of when we first got there was nothing on any of the trees. By the time we left, they were all starting to get their buds for the greening and the leaves coming out. And,
Mm.
it sort of put everything into perspective for us. I said, look how much that's changed already. And one of the rangers, again, was telling us it probably would have changed even more if we didn't have those 2 snow days and it got so cold. So you're right
Yeah.
about that perspective of the 30 days makes a big difference.
And
So-
then what about your connection with the Rangers? I know on previous shows you've talked about this too with us. It's not just getting out there and doing your own thing. It's kind of being able to get in some of the archives when you're in a park and really dig
Yes.
into some of the history that's not always on display, and kind of bending the ear of a park ranger because you're there all day and they're there and it's a smaller park, in regards to the experience. So it's not like if you're in Yosemite, that's that's hectic compared, not
Right.
hectic.
And
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
we've
You have time with
Yeah.
these rangers to learn so much more.
Yes, and because I'm such a history buff, that means as much to me as the actual taking of the pictures.
Mm.
And in this case,
Mm.
we met a fellow by the name of Ranger Mike Weinstein, who's been there for about 6 years, who brought me down to their library, which I was surprised they had a library. And for a small fort, national monument, their library is so extensive about the fort, the Southwest, Indians, the Union troops, the Civil War, everything that took place there. And he, let me borrow some books out, and I was reading them as we spent the whole time there. And when you're with the Rangers, you wind up, in my case, I feel like we create a real good bond because of the history aspects.
Mm.
And I generally offer at each park, you guys need any special pictures while I'm here, let me know what they are, and I'll try to make an effort. And we always wind up taking pictures, as many of the rangers or the maintenance people that we can, just so we
Nice.
have that for future reference, because I keep a diary. And I took pictures of all the rangers, and they've already started using them. Each day for the last 2 or 3 days, they posted one of the pictures I took of the rangers, where he introduces himself on Facebook, gives you his background, and what he does at that park, where else he's been. And my wife was looking at him this morning. She says, "That's amazing that you just did this for them, and they're already using them to
Yes.
spread the word about that park."
Yeah, and to get to know the Rangers, that is an inspiration for, the youth to get involved and become Rangers, right? It's kind of that,
Right.
and for people to understand being stewardship, like a stewardship of the land goes with history, right? Because
Oh,
stuff happened on
absolutely.
that land. And
Yeah.
the park
Right.
rangers, they're the rock stars of the park. I mean, you cannot go in a park like, when we go in, we often are with the public affairs people who will take us and show us certain things. And they're like, yay, we can get out of the office today. Let's go.
Right.
And you can't go anywhere without them being stopped 10 times by, the visitors to the park. It's like they have the hats,
Right.
they have the uniform, and everybody's like, we want to talk to a ranger. We're like, no,
Exactly.
they're our ranger today, not yours.
Mhm.
I'm kidding, but
Right.
you know what I mean? They
Yes.
are fountains of knowledge, and they become so
Mhm.
connected to the
dedicated.
park, like true stewards and interpreters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And when we
Yeah.
talked to them and met with a lot of them at this park and others, you can tell that this really, for at least most of the ones we've ever talked to, it's not a job. It's
No, it's a
beyond being
passion.
a job for them. Yeah, it really.
It's a
they have,
passion.
like you said, they have
Mm.
such a connection with that despite some of the hardships they may have, and some of these people have relocated like 6 or 7 times in their career at their own expenses just to go to a different park.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah,
You
I know a lot of rangers have done that, and they'll go even not just NPS, but they'll go through wildlife refuges, they'll go be part of the Forest Service. It is that passion, and then, you know, and it doesn't matter if it's a state park, they'll relocate it. And like our one friend, she goes from firefighting to public affairs to you know, doing like a visitor center to, you know, all these different, and she wants to, because she's like, I want to do all the roles that I possibly can.
Right.
I know eventually she's going to end up being superintendent. You know, I know
But-
I know what she's doing. I know what she's doing. You go, girl.
I know, you go. You know what would be cool is if the Rangers could dress up in period costume to match the place where they are
Mm.
and be part of the photos where you can see the people as well as the place.
Yes.
I would love that.
In
I
fact,
would love that.
I think there's some of the Rangers, when they do some historical events at Fort Union, are in fact, at least we were told, we didn't see pictures, but they do dress up the period, especially
Oh,
they get a
cool.
huge charge out of being able to fire the cannon.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
cool. Let's
Oh,
see that.
listen, I
Awesome.
I filmed a Civil War reenactment,
Love
which
that.
I think actually all Civil War reenactments should show more than that part of it. I think there's a lot more
Yeah.
behind the Civil War than what happens at these reenactments. And I'm very pro the reenactments, so people can understand like how people marched up and shot each other. Like literally, hello, hi, I'm coming
Right.
up and I'm
Yeah.
just going to shoot you, and one of us is going down first. I mean, that
Well-
takes some serious bravery, right? And
Well,
courage.
like,
And
it's like Santa Fe with his army, and they all just walked in a straight line, row after
Yeah.
row after row, being
That's
shot
insane.
at. I'm like, how nuts
They're
is
nuts.
that?
It's not, but the
Right,
cannons, I filmed the cannons and everybody is like, just be prepared. And I swear, I mean, like your tripod shakes. I mean,
Yes.
the cannon thing, I mean, you can prepare yourself, and I knew it's coming. Everybody, you could see it was going to happen. And I was trying to video and not just do stills. And I swear to God, everything moved, and I jumped every single time. There was no way I could sit through a cannon thing, no matter what. And it really,
Right.
like, it shakes you to the
Fun.
core. So when you
Yeah.
It
go
does.
to these battlefields, Manassas, you've done Manassas.
Mhm.
There's a one, I'm gonna say Monocacy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Have you been there? Monocacy?
Yes.
Monocacy? In those big barns
Mono-
where, in the
mono-
farms? Monocacy.
Monocacy.
Yeah.
Monocacy.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've been there a couple times. That's, slightly south of Gettysburg, and we've visited that
Mhm.
on the way back and forth several times.
Wow. And when you see those, when you think about at that park, and it's spread out because it's in all these farmlands, and it was different
Right.
sites during the war. And the one one area was heavy on slavery, which is something that I think I'd like to see more of in reenactments for people to understand slavery a little bit more. Because there's even slavery happening today, in different ways. But when we were there was this farmhouse, and they're explaining like the mother would hold the kids and take them far down as possible. The Civil War is being fought right on their
Right there.
farmland, where you go
Like
out
in
in the
the-
morning and
Right.
feed your ducks and chickens and everything. Here
Yeah.
they are blowing each other up with cannons. How do you, with that sound, and then the next morning you get out and there's dead bodies throughout your farm?
Yeah.
How do
Well,
you?
it's like your front
Yeah.
lawn,
It's not like you can get in a car and leave, right? It's not like
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
an evacuation route for the Civil War. So how those
Right, for sure.
farm women and mothers and their kids,
Mm,
I
crazy.
that's why these parks are so important. And then I think like where
Mm.
you were, Fort Union, you had so many several eras of history, and like you're saying, the Native American culture, like, hello, we're coming in and building a fort. And half of it was because everyone's scared of the Indians, which half of the time in the Southwest actually didn't do as much as what people think and what they thought, depending on every fort's different.
Depends.
Um,
Depends.
Right.
yeah, it depends. But when you just go back to who were the people there before it happened, what was the land like?
Yes, for sure. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Oh.
basically
with-
all of the the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the
Mm.
Santa Fe Trail. Basically, you know, we just sort of moved straight through all those Indian lands and didn't give them a whole lot of consideration about,
Yep.
you know, you know, in a sense, they didn't view land the same way we do, but it was their land, their hunting grounds, their villages,
Right.
and they just kind of got swept away.
Mm.
Well, and special areas that were sacred to them, just march over it. 'Cause
Right,
don't know,
right, right.
don't know, don't care, and it's really interesting what people do to each other,
Yes.
and for what reasons. It is an interesting thing. That's what makes history so fascinating, is what we have done to each other and continue to do.
Right, and that fort, I mean, there's so many various aspects of the history ties they have that you can sort of really get a picture on what was going on in America in the Southwest at that time, to see all these stories get woven together and, lead you to believe, like, where are we going in the future too? And it's a good thing they're there to remind us of, here's what really did happen at some of these sites.
Mm.
Yeah,
And-
and without modern conveniences, we kind of forget, like you can go with your cell phone and take a photo, or you can go with a camera and
Right.
take a photo. But back then, somebody had to sit and draw it and paint
Right,
it,
right.
so they hit, it's,
But they did
we've
take
come-
photos. They did take photos. And
but
depending on the time frame, but that's also something where, I mean, it took so much longer with those,
Yeah.
old,
Yes.
those box cameras, and like, if you think about that, like is that something that was interesting to you at Fort Union? Did you get to see? Because when we were there, it was right in the middle of the pandemic, and
Right.
you couldn't go in the visitor center. And I think they were renovating the visitor center too, and creating a new
Yes, they were.
big one.
And it just reopened, and it is just a beautiful, brand new interior visitor center that covers literally almost every aspect that we've just talked about, from the American Indians to people on the Santa Fe Trail. One of the interesting things we were talking about modern convenience is, we can drive in a car for 8 or 9 hours and do 600-700 miles. They said the wagon train on a day would make about 8 to 10 miles a day on a good day.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Start walking, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
weren't there also Buffalo Soldiers there, or am I thinking of a different park? I recall
No,
something.
you are. There were, yes, Buffalo Soldiers were there too, and they have a small display inside the museum now about the Buffalo Soldiers as well. So they really covered a lot, and they're very proud of how good that visitor center and the interior now looks with their renovations.
Very cool.
And they've really picked up speed, I think, after all the slowdown of the pandemic.
That's exciting. Well, they're in a good area. They're near Las Vegas, New Mexico, which architecturally is a fascinating place. And so I think for history lovers, this is an area to go to the plaza in Las Vegas and go to the park and connect it all, because it's kind of like, it's like the pioneers and settlers after the fort went to Las Vegas in a way,
That's right. In fact, we did spend a good amount of time in Las Vegas to pick up our supplies. We got to meet some local people. I wound up going into one of the art galleries and then eventually giving an art talk towards the end of the program about what the Artist in Residence program is. And we met the president of the Art League, and his name is Richard Lindenberg, who worked for the Department of Forestry, the IRS, and there's another national agency he worked for as a speechwriter. And what he told us was an incredible story, that as a very young boy, he was at the opening day ceremonies for Fort Union in the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
it was really incredible. Yeah, to realize that he goes, now I don't remember the speeches, but I remember a lot of other stuff that went on that day at the fort. and nobody at the fort knew who he was. And they said, perhaps we should get together with him and do an interview and put it on our website.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Get those
It's-
in-person stories while you can. I mean, that's kind of how, right
Well-
now, it's like, it's the race to get all the stories of World War II, you know? It's like,
But interesting last name.
mhm.
Interesting last name, you know? It's like, if you followed his family history,
I wonder if
you
he's
see-
related to the Lindenbergs. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
It's
Interesting.
not spelled that. It's not spelled that way.
Yes.
He's actually, his father was a professor at New Mexico University in Las Vegas. He
Okay.
moved around the country several times with the federal agencies, and he, you know, the time we talked to him at the art gallery, he had some fascinating stories that I told him, you know, you ought to write a book about some of these things.
Mm.
Yeah, I bet. I
Mm.
bet. Well, yeah, you know, interviewing retired rangers. I don't care
Yeah.
what park service it is or forest service. They're fascinating. I mean, they can tell you,
Mhm.
you know, we did an interview with a husband and wife couple who are both rangers, and he was a superintendent at Yosemite, lava beds, all kinds of like major parks. And we got to some of the parks he was like, you have to go to these remote ones, you must go, you know.
Mhm.
And he told stories about like just not having the funding and how they would make their own park signs because
Mhm.
there was no parks. There was, at that point, we still didn't have as many of the friends groups. Maybe I think NPCA, the National Parks Conservation Association, is I think the very first nonprofit in this country, if I'm not mistaken, actual nonprofit protecting our parks for sure. And because they were part of the Park Service, and then Stephen Mather said, okay, we need people to now watch over what the government does with our parks. And so
Right.
that's how that happens, so that the funding
Yeah.
happens, et cetera. And I'm not getting political about any of it. I'm just saying we got to, you know, protect our parks. And that's why you go. And that's part of this, you know, the beauty of the residency and what you're doing with photography, I think is so
Oh,
important
yeah.
because not everybody in the world gets to go. And
Yeah.
Right.
and I think you transfer over these feelings. So when you're photographing, I mean, you've got so many photos that give you the sense of feel of the terrain, soft but rugged and hard and windy. And I don't know, photographing the wind in the wind is not the easiest thing. It's just,
No.
it's hell. It's hell. And
It is.
it's like, it's hard. You know what I mean?
Yes. And in fact, there was a lot of days because the wind, I mean, they had told us some of the winds while we were there were up to 55, 60 miles an hour. That
Whoa.
you were right about the tripod too, that the tripod, you know, my tripods that I have to carry on a plane are not the big heavy duty box camera tripods. So I could almost feel that tripod was shifting and moving at the same time. So often it was just as easy for me to hand hold the camera than it was to use the tripod.
Yeah.
And you're right. Some of the elements I've had people tell me, well, I certainly wouldn't get up at 5:30 in the morning to go photograph the possibility of a sunrise. And I said, you're missing out on a lot of good sunrises if you don't do that.
That's
like, oh,
I can't, I don't understand that.
I don't get it.
Especially
No.
when you have this amazing opportunity to be there, and the wind is normally quite calmer at that point. There's these
Right.
little window, there's certain, like right now, we're in April, and where we are in Texas, it's wind season, and the desert knows wind in spring. March, April, and October gets like that, depending on where you are. And we all know it's the wind time, but there's these breaks, and you know, as soon as the wind is going to slow down, and it's normally that moment of dawn. And when you're out there, that's when you hear everything come to life. At sunrise it's like the world is waking up, and you can stand out there. And even in a desolate area that you're in, there's birds.
Amazing.
There's you have a lot of bird life there, actually. You have antelope and elk, right? So so they're all out talking. I mean, isn't that part of the joy too, is being at the Dawn's Chorus?
That's right. And my wife and I often discuss, we get to see stuff that most park visitors, especially at like Fort Union, that doesn't actually open till about 8 in the morning. They don't even have that opportunity. I had the same
Mm.
thing at Capulon Volcano where that
Yeah.
closes at 4. And we had the ability to still go to the top of the volcano at sunset and up there for
Ooh.
night sky pictures that, the ordinary visitor doesn't get that. These artist and resident programs sure do. And the park people are great about giving you either special programs or special talks, some behind the scenes places that the average visitor wouldn't get to see that. Hopefully I share some of that work with them when they view my work. I've already started picking out some works for some exhibitions here in Northern Virginia over the next couple of months.
Oh,
But and
cool.
your work is going to inspire people to go to the park and inspire people to look at photography, painting, anything creative to
Right.
express what
Going
they
for
feel.
myself, right.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's it. There's, you get to go to these special places and there's, listen, the residency, applying for the residency, that's, it's worth it. And you're not always
Yeah.
going to get it, but then apply again. And Jim is spoken on this. We've got a, Q&A with you too on our site, nationalparktraveling.com, where you just keep trying. But part of why this process is so important is there's so much when you're doing federal lands, permitting, like most public can't go to some of the places you go to, but there's permitting, there's park rangers that will maybe take you, or you know what I mean? Because it's like if you go to a winery as a photographer, the winery, unless you have permission first, they don't want you walking through the vineyards. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there's
Right.
safety, there's don't touch the
Well, there's
artifacts,
concerns.
yeah.
There's
And so,
concerns.
but for
Safety
us,
concerns.
as viewers, we get to see something that we're not going to always get to see or even go at all. And I
Right.
think that transcends, and you give, like I was saying, you give us this feel of the terrain. How are you feeling about the people that were stationed there and living there over the years? Because there were a few women there too, I believe, that were also there. So when you went out photographing and then going through, the museum and the library, like you're saying, or the visitor center, excuse me, and seeing who was there, because there's got to be photos, right? And illustrations of who. I mean, did you feel
Yes.
like connected to them?
We actually did, especially in the evenings when you'd walk around and you could, I know this sounds a little strange, but my analogy with those buildings that are deteriorating and they were telling us how they bring these preservation crews in the summer to re-strengthen the walls and that kind of stuff, was this aspect of how these people survived at that time. And the buildings in the late afternoon sun and dusk almost reminded me of sort of a Stonehenge kind of aspect to the park, that this is what's left of a whole group of 40 or 50 years of civilization in the American Southwest. And these are the remnants of that life, which is, there's still a connection there with all of those people and their great, great, great grandchildren that are connected. And when we were in Las Vegas, we actually did meet a couple people who had a connection of somebody who had gone through that fort 150 years ago.
Wow.
Wow. That's cool. That's way cool.
That was cool.
See, this is what makes history come alive. Because I just think back to high school and junior high school and such, and thinking that history was really boring. And it really isn't. When you get to go out and experience a real part of history, your imagination gets a kickstart, if I can put it that way, where you can start to really think what it must have been like. Like we think in terms of what we have today. But, it's like, oh, you remember on the wagon train, maybe you're walking beside a donkey. Maybe you get to ride a horse, or, it's totally, totally different than how we live today. Even how did they iron their clothes? How did they do this? How did they do that? And so we have all these modern conveniences that kind of take history out. But 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now will become history. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And even some of the
Listen.
stories we had picked up on the Santa Fe Trail, where some of the people were talking, literally going through the state of Kansas, where some of the wagon trains in, like, I want to say the 1830s, 40s, which weren't the really big ones that came later, where some of the people who kept diaries were talking about buffalo herds, they thought in excess of 10,000 people over the
Oh,
horizon, 10,000 buffalo
wow.
over the horizon.
Wow.
I mean, it must have been
That's huge.
incredible to see something like that.
That is
Yeah.
incredible.
Wow. Wow. Because to find a buffalo and see a buffalo today, you're looking at a park or a zoo or,
Yellowstone. There's some areas, there's some parks we've been to with buffalo, but I mean, still, it's
yeah,
still not what it was
but they're
like.
not wild and free so
Right.
much
Yellowstone,
Right.
they are. Yeah,
to
I
a
mean,
point.
to a point, but yeah, when they're just part of the landscape and to be taken back there. What was your feelings in regards to how photos were taken at the fort of, I mean, did you get to see photos of the people like we were talking about a little bit before? But what is that like? I mean, you're talking about those big box cameras and stuff like that. So that's,
Yeah,
I mean, didn't
right.
the military do it to document and then it wasn't like, it's more documentation, right? When
Yes,
photography was
I
out there.
think they might have done that, but there was also a photographer by the name of Jackson who was very important to the Yellowstone, documenting that,
Mhm.
who also did a lot of photography of the wagon
Mm.
trains of the Southwest. And some of those pictures are actually used on their displays as you walk around the fort itself. And in those days, when you have the box camera, which, believe it or not, I still have one of those, which I
Cool.
haven't used in
Cool.
years.
Cool.
I mean, that is a super time-consuming effort to not only carry that around, but to set it up. And
Mhm.
knowing, on a good day, if you took 3 to 5 pictures, that was a lot of pictures. And you hope
Mm.
that everybody was where you wanted them, and you would have to tell people not to walk around for like 30 seconds because of how long exposures were back then. I
Yeah.
mean, for the conditions they were under, they have a good set of very good photographs showing exactly what that fort looked like in its prime.
Mm.
My grandmother on my mom's side used to paint black and white photos into color photos for Kodak. That was her
Oh,
job.
wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh man, this is cool because she showed me once her set of paints. And I'm like, no way. I had no idea that some of the color photos were actually hand painted.
Yes, right, right.
Yeah, it's amazing, when you think about it, that, now we're used to, oh, get your camera out or your cell phone and there's your color photo. But way back
Right.
then, yeah, they were hand painted. You
Yeah,
had your
for
black
sure.
and white photo. It's amazing. I find it amazing. I really do.
In fact, in a lot of high school graduation photos from the 1950s, that's how the final photographs were presented to people who bought the packages. Those were hand painted or hand colored
Wow.
photographs, black and white. As late as 1950s.
Wow.
This is
Ah,
cool. This is
go
cool.
Granny.
Yeah. Yeah,
Go
no.
Granny.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, when you think about the stages of photography, I mean, when you were in school, Jim, did you ever think you'd be walking around with a phone taking photographs? I mean,
Yeah.
that
Absolutely
was,
not. In fact, when digital first came out, and I used to use a photo center around here in Northern Virginia, I kept saying, well, should I be buying? And he goes, no. It's going to be a while before you get decent prints. And then all of a sudden, within a short span of time, I went in there one day and the guy said to me, I want to show you some prints in the back that were taken with a digital camera. And I don't remember which camera it was, but he had shown me some 20 by 30 prints of film and digital, and you could hardly tell a difference whatsoever. And he says, now's the time to buy digital.
wow.
See,
Yeah.
and this is interesting because when you listen to a CD versus an LP, I'm really going back. I'm
Right.
so dating myself. LP always sounded warmer to me.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking about the cameras. Is the old age camera warmer in tone than what we have now on a cell phone? Or is it
Mhm.
pretty much accurate? Which one is accurate? You know?
Well, what I think winds up winning it, at least in my mind, for the digital, and even to the point of a cell phone, is there's so much unbelievable software that
Mhm.
you can take a very
Oh, yeah.
mediocre photograph and wind up making it look like
Mhm.
some famous photographer took it. And
Yeah.
you may not have had a lot to do with the final result other than running it through the software, but that's created this whole other explosion of people now
Mhm.
who do take a lot of photographs and fix them up in the software packages so that you can replicate, I think, anything you could put on film, you could make it
Mm.
look the same exact way with a digital camera.
Right.
The big difference, people take so many more photographs now than they ever would with a film camera.
Right,
Oh, for
right.
sure.
But
For sure.
the other thing too is, it's still how many photos you want to take of the same, it's like you still, because otherwise your time is just sift and sift and sift through photos. And
Yes.
I know, because I'm still terrible about that. Like, because I get
Mhm.
paranoid. I'm like, you never know if you can't come back. And you always think, oh,
Mhm.
we'll always could be able to circle back around. You know what? Things
Right.
change. Pandemics
Mhm.
They
happen,
do.
or natural disasters, right? How many photos do I
Right.
have of places that got nailed by fire or hurricanes? And
Mhm.
there's all
Yeah.
kinds of reasons why to take it when you can. And it may not be the
Absolutely.
best lighting, but
Right.
we've had so many like photographers on the show, and they're just like, take the damn photo, take it.
Well,
But
it's
but
true.
learn to take it as best you can,
Right.
because
Right.
still, otherwise, I mean, how much space do you want? How much storage space do you want of the same photo? 100 photos. It is about getting your composition right. At least if you have to change lighting, you
Mhm.
can. But you're right. Even the software stuff that is there, there's an art form to that. I mean, I know photographers, they
Yeah.
have a certain style with their coloring. They have a certain style of what they do with it, and it's an art. It is an art
It is an
form
art.
of
It
taking a
is an art
photo.
form.
There's some photos that look like paintings by the time people are
Yeah.
done with them, the photographers are done.
Mhm.
And I think that
Yep.
is still art, because it's you're still learning lighting and
Creative.
color. And yeah, I mean, you can take people out of photos, which is
Yes.
fun. What I mean? It's
Right.
like,
Right.
It's a good thing in history, like we have in our storage unit, like 50, 60,000 slides of Africa in different places that we lived in Africa. And I know now when you watch TV programs and you see the difference, like when I first went to Africa, you would get 20 species at a watering hole and take a photo of it. 10 years later, you go to the same watering hole and you might get 3 different
Wow.
species. Yeah, so
Mhm.
there's a huge historic difference. It really does tell a story of who we are and what we are doing. It really,
Right.
really does.
yeah.
I,
Well,
I
you
love
might
it.
have a historic, valuable photographs there then.
Yeah, I mean, she's got
Yeah, I
photos
have,
of Mount Kilimanjaro with actual snow on it,
yeah,
what it's now is I mean, it still gets
mm,
snow, but climate
not like
change,
it used to, not like it
it's
used to.
different.
Right.
Yeah,
In
and
fact,
poaching and
you can see rainbows off the snow depending on what time of day you were photographing. They
Wow.
were, yeah, no, that, oh man, I want to go to our storage unit.
I know it's, and then you digitize them, and then I threw a bunch of
Yeah.
photos before we were on the tour because of digital cameras weren't doing
Mm,
high def, right? And
Right.
so
Right.
mm,
then if you look at old photos, now there's things you can do. Then there weren't. And I was like,
Yes.
well, that's a waste, it's out. And now I'm like,
mhm.
I really wish I kept some, because I had some really good photos of certain places and parks and
Right.
stuff. And
Right.
I'm like, that was really dumb, like to just toss them.
Yeah.
Like that was dumb. And so I think
Right.
we always have to kind of realize that there's always going to be something new on the horizon. So don't throw it away.
Oh, yeah. Don't
You
throw it
know?
away.
Right.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
Actually, I
No
was
way.
the high school yearbook and newspaper photographer, and believe it or not, I still have original black and white negative films from
Ooh,
my high school that I still have in storage.
Wow, and
wow,
you
how
know
cool.
that value in
Well,
history for people, doing family
yeah.
history now and stuff like that, that is
Mhm.
valuable, you know?
Yeah.
I have
Right.
friends, I have friends who have actually found through connecting on like ancestry.com and stuff like that, somebody had purchased an antique frame and it had a photo inside it in an antique store kind of thing, or flea market or
Uh-huh.
antique thing. And it turned out to be her grandfather or great grandfather in this photo.
That's crazy. That's
And
crazy.
they
Oh,
connected
boy.
through ancestry.com, and she's like, I finally have a photo. And she didn't know that side of her
Wow.
family. And it matched up.
Right.
Their names
Oh.
were on the back, because back in the day, things were written in the Bible,
Mhm.
written on the back of photos. And
Yeah.
so she was able to have this piece of history and do a whole other section of family history because of this one photo that somebody says,
Mhm.
hey, I saw this posted here. I think I have a photo of your great grandfather. I mean, that's insane.
That's
That's
crazy.
Mhm.
that's why I say
Right.
those kind of the value is, and
Mhm.
I think what you did at Fort Union and your other battlefields and historic sites, there's something about connecting with your family. I mean, I think there's a weird genetic thing we have in us as human beings that we know other family members have been there, just because Nancy and I end up going places, have a strong pull to go somewhere, thinking it's the park, the nature, and then we'll find out our family has been there. Like, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's happened
It's
all over the
really
place.
odd. Yeah.
Very odd,
Even
but
from California to Pennsylvania.
yeah, I mean, it's weird and it just keeps
And
happening, but if you look at birds migrate to specific places, like an Oriole family will keep coming to the same house year after year after
yeah.
year. And even if climate change happens, it'll maybe alter a little bit in timing, right? So I feel like
Uh-huh.
we have this as human beings. And as we start to really get into our history, going to a place like Fort Union, if you had
Mhm.
somebody who served in Fort Union, you want to go there. I mean, what if that cannon was the one that your great 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 grandfather shot off or something? And
Right.
you can actually
Right.
touch that cannon or see it and be
Mhm.
really there's nothing like
Connection.
that, like
It's a
that
connection.
connection. But to even
Mhm.
if
Right.
it's the photos that you're doing, they can have a sense of that family, because a lot of people go through forts are like mini cities. I mean,
Yes.
that's yeah. I wonder if they get a lot of
Mhm.
people there for genealogy. You know, I bet they do.
That I don't know. They were just as we were leaving. This is their pickup of a lot more visitors, and they were bringing on 3 new rangers. So, and of course, it's
Mm.
just a short distance off I-25. So, I think they have a much stronger season in the middle of the summer. Plus, they bring
Mhm.
the preservation people back in to do a lot of the fixing up of the buildings and restructuring the walls and everything. So they were really getting pumped up about the upcoming season for them.
Mm.
That's cool.
Well, they're near
Isn't
Santa
it?
Fe too. And in the summer, like May, June is where, a lot of Europeans come over and do those kind of park circuits. I mean, I know you belong
Yeah.
to all those park Facebook groups like I do. And, and you see these groups and people are like, I'm going from here. Is it worth it? I'm always, yes. Yes. I don't care
Right.
what it is.
Yeah.
Yes, do
Right.
it. You see people like, oh, is this park worth it? It's like, yes. And it's about changing your
Yes.
mind too, you
That's
know?
right. Yeah.
Well, it's
A
about
lot of those
growing
groups,
and
yeah.
learning.
And that's how we wind up also finding out about different parks, different places. There was another
Mm.
place just a short distance from Fort Union that one of the artists had told us at the artist talk that night. And she said, well, this is called, and I have the name wrong, Rio del something. And it was about 14 miles away, and it was run by the Bureau of Fish and Wildlife. And
Mm.
they had set up on this area, they had reinstituted a buffalo herd.
Oh.
And people at the park hadn't heard of it yet. So when you
Wow.
make
Oh
those
my gosh.
connections, yeah, when you make the connections, it really opens up a whole other avenue of things you can go see and do.
Mm. I love this. I
Awesome.
love that you get these opportunities to dig in. You know, and I think
Mhm.
that's what
Yes.
the residencies are about, is to dig in and I want to tell people, you know, the National Parks Arts Foundation, you could be a dancer, a poet, a filmmaker, a crochet,
Mhm.
you know, artist, you know, textiles,
Crochet
pottery.
artist.
I mean, it doesn't, and digital art. There's so
Mhm.
many new modes, singers,
Facets, yeah.
songwriters. I mean, these residencies are open to artists of all mediums and genres and sensibilities, and it's really worth doing. How many residents have you done? Because I know you've done with others too. How many have you done now, Jim, do you think?
At the national parks, that was my 11th.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. So where's next? Do you have a next one, or are you hanging out in your area?
For the time being, we're hanging out. I think I have about 3 other outstanding applications that haven't been responded to for 2023. And I'm sort of picking out 1 or 2 that I'd really like to go do in 2024. My goal is to do average 1 per year until I'm 100.
Oh, cool.
Well, right on. I dig it. I dig it.
Awesome. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, right
Mhm.
now, I mean, it's just when you see, I mean, NPIF, are there ones that you haven't applied for that you want to, or is there any park in specific from the NPIF roster of residencies that you'd like to go and do that you haven't done yet?
I would like to do, but I'm not sure. Some of the parks do not allow your spouse to come
Ah,
because of housing issues, and I don't know if that would be an issue too. That I think with
Mm.
National Parks Foundation that do allow the spouses are the one in Hawaii, and I believe the other one in the Dry Tortugas. Those would be 2 near the top of the list.
yeah, and they do
Hmm.
allow spouses, for both of those residencies. Yeah, and I think that is unique. And I think it's smart, you know, because, you know, your
Yeah,
partner is a partner in helping
right.
so that there's a
Mm.
help with that and an experience and a creative connection.
Well,
And Dry
it,
Tortugas, you have to have someone with you. You can't go solo
but it's
because you're so remote.
double the pair of eyes. It's double
Yeah.
the feeling. It's double the sensibilities. It's double everything. You get two times,
Yeah,
like
some
for
people want to
your,
be completely alone though. Some artists are like, leave me alone. I'm going in.
yeah.
But like Dry Tortugas, I know for a fact you have to have a second person just because you are off grid on a remote island, Loggerhead Key, on the middle of the ocean. I think that is so cool. And then Hawaii volcanoes. I mean, we call it the art house, the art B&B.
Mm.
The house is like they've got a recording studio, dance floor. I mean, it's
Awesome.
I want to go.
Me too.
And the people that have gone just
Mm.
keep coming back and going, it's so cool to see change of lava as these, you know,
Mhm.
volcanoes erupt. And you always think about volcano eruptions as being ancient history. You know, there's just that feeling.
Mm.
Right.
When you're a kid, they're like, this volcano happened, and you know, and yet it's happening now, and you can
Right.
go be part of
It's
that.
it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
Lisa, where were we? It's all lava, and then there's a daisy growing out of the lava.
But yeah, no, we've done a lot of lava places. Not Meteor Crater. We've done Meteor Crater, and that's weird. But we've done like Flagstaff area has a lot of volcanic kind of stuff, but Oregon, there's Newberry National Monument, and it's a volcano, and you can see all the lava, the basalt, however you want to say it, and there's trees and flowers growing out of it. And then you go down the road, and it's part of the National Forest Service, and there's the obsidian fields. And I'm not kidding. And I climbed up to the top of this hill to look down, and there's this beautiful crystal blue lake. It started snowing on us, and the hills have these big black bumps, like the hill going down to the lake, and it's huge pieces of obsidian. And you're walking through this field of, I mean, boulders. It looks like giant pieces of shiny licorice. I got hungry. And I mean, just hiking through there, I'm like, I found Candyland, you know, it was just, how did this, I mean, this is amazing. And the elements were so rough, and it's high desert Oregon, you know, and then there's one out in Mojave Trails National Monument, just outside like, it's right off Route 66 by, in the town of Amboy, which is a gas station and a motel and a burger place. Very historic and cool to go to. So it's north of Joshua Tree National Park. So a lot of people do this. It's Amboy Crater, and I mean, it's just, we went in spring, like we were there this time of year in during the pandemic when everything got shut down. In fact, we got turned around at Joshua Tree, and we were filming tent caterpillars eating their way out of their cocoons. And so we wanted to
Oh,
go
wow.
back and see what was going on. Like, they're creepy, man. That's a sci-fi thing right there. And so then we got turned away because we wanted to do like a daily, what happened with the caterpillars, and I mean, I was filming them with their mandibles, like gung, gung, gung. They were just chewing their way out, man. Just like packets of caterpillars everywhere. And it is like a sci-fi movie, but anyway, they turned everyone down because no one was allowed to go anywhere. We were all shut in. And so we went to Amboy Crater again, which is now part of Mojave Trails. And there's these huge chunks of lava and wildflowers and verbena growing between the chunks of lava, and daisies, like Nancy was saying, marigold, desert marigolds. And I'm like, it's wild. And I just, you go to these places and nature astounds you, and knowing that people lived among this, in these
Right.
rough
Right.
places just blows my mind,
Okay. It really is amazing to ponder what people went through to get to these places years and years ago when they're first exploring and all of America and North America. Just amazing.
It truly is. And I love that you keep doing parks. Hopefully we'll get to meet you in person when we're going to be back east. We're on our way from Lubbock. We start heading east and then north up a little bit. We're going to go to Maryland. So that's kind of close, isn't it? I think it is.
Yeah, that's very close.
Yep. I don't think DC will happen for us. We're still like, I don't know. Someone has to like drive us around, because I don't know about that. All I know is we always get lost in Manassas, and we haven't been to the battlefield yet, but we get lost up there very easily.
Okay, if you get lost, you have my number, I think. You could
yeah, I'm gonna call
us
Jim. We're in the middle of a battlefield and I can't pronounce it. That's how it is. But yeah, no, I think it's fantastic, and best of luck on the next set of applications you've set out to send out to people. I always want to go this with you because you've done so many of them. Any tips for people, artists and musicians, writers, applying and looking to apply, maybe especially for their first time for a residency? Any tips to get them to just go for it, man? Do it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to convince yourself mentally that there's going to be a lot of applications in most cases, and do the best you can. And then you just have to be very persistent and expect to, reapply, because once you've done it two or three times, most park applications are very similar. The unique part is you've got to give 5 or 6 examples of your best work, and you've got to write out an explanation of why you specifically want to come to that park and why that park is so important for you to get one of the residents in. And once you kind of get that together, you can apply for 8 or 10 a year. And if you get one a year, you're doing really well. And once you start it becomes somewhat addictive, because like you said, there's just so many unique opportunities when you get to the park, between behind the scenes tours and the rangers giving you information and the local communities interested in it. It's just sort of a priceless experience.
I love it. I know, that's why we can't stop. I mean, we're on the road full time playing parks, and the world gets so big, when you go, yet so small at the same time. When you start really getting into it,
Right.
It is just like, wow, this is far bigger than what I thought. Like, this world is big. And then yet you get so connected, so it feels small. And then you start to realize how everything is connected. Like the Civil War in the Southwest, people don't think about it. And even the Civil War almost came part of it ending was because of the Bascom affair that happened in a fort south of that, and not Fort Churchill, Fort Bowie, down in southern Arizona. And so this was a huge part of the effort. And people look at me like, no, the Civil War is only like the North and the South. I'm like, the Southwest played a role, make no mistake.
Right.
It's just different, you know. And those forts tell stories. Forts are fascinating. They really do.
They certainly are.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, again, Jim's website is photomanva.zenfolio.com. The National Parks Arts Foundation, go to their site, nationalparksartsfoundation.org. And it is a great place to go look at their different applications, their different residencies if you're an artist. But I also work with people who are I can't say it, Nancy, philanthropic. Thank you. You know, because they really do work on donations and partnerships. And then also if you're a destination, a community who wants to be part of the program and maybe have a residency, I'd definitely check out the website, because what Jim has done, his photos will go all around the world. And that is something that promotes your region too. So there's good tourism marketing in this too. I'm just saying, don't you think, Nancy? With artists
and I just like anything that puts history forward, because it's such a difficult subject to teach and to be taught to. You know, but yet it's how humanity learns to better itself.
That's right. That's right. So everyone, again, nationalparksartsfoundation.org. And then Jim, you're on Facebook and on Instagram, right? Those are the two best places?
Correct. That's good.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. And everyone, again, we are here every first Friday talking about parks and art. You can keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.